Judiciars, the silent slayers of the Space Marines. Lore and commentary will begin after a brief story to get us in the mood and show us what is to be discussed. From the Bold Library, Paragon. Bolt fire echoed throughout the ship, its clangor near deafening those who survived its ire. Chapter serfs littered the halls and walkways. Everywhere there was blood and death. The strike cruiser, Oath of Vengeance, had been patrolling this segment of space for weeks, lurking, hunting, attempting to track down the raiders that came from an undisclosed warp rift somewhere in the locale. Yet, the hunter had become the hunted. While investigating what they thought was another burnt-out wreck, the detritus left by the raiders, they had fallen into a trap. The large cargo convoy seemed to be utterly smashed. There were practically no life signs from any of the burnt-out wrecks that formed a solemn spectacle, but there had been a few. So the captain of the 4th Company had ordered their strike cruiser into the midst of the floating graveyard. If they could gain even a tiny bit of information about the raiders, it would be worth the time invested. Yet, when they had slowly moved past the ships, approaching the only one with any life signs, a cascade of explosions was sent off all around their vessel. Advanced mines had been activated and magnetically locked to the hull of the Oath of Vengeance, then detonated, tearing huge rents in its flanks and opening much of it to the cold void of space. Hundreds died in the explosions, hundreds more by decompression across huge swathes of the ship. That was just the beginning. Out of the masses of dead ships, one powered up and then raked the Oath of Vengeance from prow to stern at tantamount to point-blank range. The confusion was catastrophic, as boarding pods slammed through the void of space and struck the Oath of Vengeance at strategically significant locations. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. But then, they were veterans of the Long War. Things devolved into an exercise in carnage. Traitor Marines swept the decks and made for the prime points in the cruiser. Being Marines, they knew exactly where to hit, knew the layout of the ship as if they had witnessed its construction. The fate of the entire vessel and all it carried would be decided in mere hours, if not minutes. Squad Serpents Ferris were young, barely out of aspirant fatigues. They had power armor, but only on their chests, with pauldrons, but little else. They were scouts. Despite years of striving, surviving, they were not true Marines of the battle line. Not yet. Unfortunate, as they were now the last line of resistance protecting the engine room. And they knew it. Their sergeant had stormed them up 3 decks and screamed at them to get to this location, but had been shot in the back of the head just as the blast doors were closed. His cranium had disappeared, showering the area with his blood, skull, and brain matter. Only a bolt round could do that. The young Marine scouts now spread out and took up hard positions as best they could, but the vision of their only experienced man laying dead with his head missing did nothing to steady them. They were Marines, so they felt no fear, but none would gamble their last rations against their chances of survival. The massive doorway now began to slowly heat and glow, as the traitor Marines had brought up a melter or other weapon to break down their defenses. It would only be minutes now. The scouts clutched their shotguns tight, preparing to sell themselves dearly. Then a clang rang out from inside this room, and all shifted their eyes and aim to the source. To one side, a hatch in the deck opened. With relief, the scouts saw the head and then shoulders, then all of him, as Vispus pulled himself through a hatch that seemed way too tight for such a Goliath. He must have crawled through the ducts for at least half a mile to get here. Vispus now stood and looked at each of them, gaining eye contact and nodding to each man. He did not speak. He was forbidden to do so, as he was not yet a full chaplain. There would be no fiery oratory, no litanies to engulf the souls of the men around him. He was a judiciar. That was not their way. The doors were now white-hot, and their integrity dramatically failed. Like a mirror made of water, the doors just washed downwards in a pool of sparks and liquid slag. All others hunkered down and prepared to fire at whatever came through it. Not Vespers. He stood there, a few paces to the side of the door, his blade tapping against his boot, as if he were bored of their tardiness, impatient for the fight. The last golden liquid fell down, and then in they came. Black armor, gold trim, warplate of patterns not seen on even the most celebrated veterans of the chapter. Old armor for old foes. Chaos traitor space marines. Men who were used to bullying and destroying cowards, it seemed, for they did not check their flanks as they dove into the room. Not one. How heady on victory they must have been. But this would not last. The fire from the scout shotguns gave them pause, but did not stop them, not one. Yet, all of a sudden, Vespers raised his left arm over his head, and from a strange hourglass artifact in his hand, a wave came out and struck the oncoming traitors. It was so odd. They seemed to slow down. It was not like a broken Pict, where a second can equate to an hour. No. They still moved faster than any mortal could, but they were not as fast as they should be. Not as fast as true Astartes would be. With one fluid motion, the Judiciar Vespers placed a tempora mortis on the ground, and then went to work. His huge red blade was ancient, and thrummed with power as he carved into them. The skill of the traitors was exceptional, even with their speed reduced, yet Vespers, despite his age, was more than a match for any of them now. His blade swung in arcs to confuse the enemy, so confident, powerful, accurate, and swift was he. He, a Primaris all in black, dwarfed those around him. It was like an Ogryn amongst militia, as his strength and skill matched and overwhelmed their experience and cruelty. A few of the enemies shot at him, but their bolts were stopped by Vespers' Rosaria shield. He did not miss a beat as he slew his way towards what was obviously the lord of the enemy, a twisted monster nearing his own size, which was incredible for a firstborn, as all of the traitors were, and the two engaged. The Chaos Scum had a screaming blade that dripped blood and offal with each strike, versus the gleaming two-handed blade of the Judiciar. The Chaos Lord was so swift, so engorged with twisted gifts from his dark benefactors, that the effect from the artifact seemed negligible. The two went at it, swords moving at speeds the scouts could barely see, even they. But Squad Serpens Verus noticed it, for they could see the slower traitors closing around Vespers, trying to trip him or even strike him in the back while he concentrated on the Chaos Lord. Incensed, they got up. They all did, and they charged the enemy. Their shotguns barely dented their armor, but in they went with their combat knives, searching out weak points, slamming home blades into throats and the slithers between warplate. Vespers released a final flurry of blows, and at its end, the traitor's head bounced across the decking. The scouts released a cheer and redoubled their wrath, and it seemed to empower the Judiciar, as he did not slow after such a colossal effort. If anything, he sped up. He was like a whirlwind of destruction, as he did not just force the enemy back out of the engine room. As the scouts followed, they helped keep the pressure up, and Vespers just would not stop. He hacked and headbutted, impaled and eviscerated as he went, with the scouts only really protecting his flanks and rear. At the last, Vespers drew his Absolver heavy bolt pistol to fire at those who turned tail to run. Marines, even traitors, running? The scouts could not believe their eyes. The scum! The enemy ship would break off, and the Oath of Vengeance would limp back to dock, but it had survived. and the raiders had been given a bloody nose they would never forget. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and units of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we shall be dealing with one of the bravest and most unrelenting of all Marines, the Judiciar. The Judiciar. A paragon of the battlefield, a chaplain in training. And many will misconstrue the chaplain, thinking of them as only an orator on steroids, some form of battle priest who gives more to the chapter by his sermons than by the edge of his blade. Let me be explicit here. This is simply not the case. For the primary role of the chaplain is inspirational. The Astartes, the Space Marines, are not men of many words. For them the truest currency is, and always shall be, action, deeds. And I would say that they are like a truly amazing commissar. But that is not entirely true either, for the commissariat was created in the image of the chaplaincy, not the other way round. First and foremost, the chaplaincy of the Space Marines are the best of the best. They are the heroes of the chapter that are not truly amongst the command structure. Although a chaplain can indeed take command of a company or squad, it is not their best role, and not often in most chapters. Their primary and best use is to be the guiding lights of the chapter. They inspire the men around them with their will, their ability, their unshakable faith in themselves, and the righteousness of their cause. The chaplain is a hero who can beat 100 enemies in a single day. They are the warrior you place in the doorway or choke point, who states that none shall pass. They motivate their brethren by showing them the way, by virtue of skill and courage. Each is carefully chosen, and their training is a long and difficult process. To many, the training of a chaplain is even more exacting than that of a tech marine, or even a psyker, a librarian. For they must epitomize the very best of their brotherhood. They must be without blemish, without fear, without hesitation, and without peer. Each is a paragon of the Space Marines that cannot be ignored. For when they exhort their brethren to great deeds, there is an avalanche of glories behind them. It is their example that holds the line in check when they arrive. It is their example that takes those brothers around and empowers them, invigorates them, forces them to do the very best that they can achieve. For none wish to truly be lessened by another warrior's example, and so they lead by their deeds alone. Now this is often augmented by litanies that they will shout out in the name of the Emperor while knee-deep in the foe. But these things are secondary. It is their activity that counts the most. Hence, when an exceptional Space Marine is found, one who stands truly head and shoulders above the norm among such legendary warriors, it is they who are tasked with taking the first steps on the road to chaplaincy. But first, they must learn how to inspire with action. So a Judiciar will willingly take a vow of silence until they make the grade and are elevated to being a full chaplain. The Judiciar is a novice chaplain who has taken such an oath. Yet they are part of the chaplaincy, so they are given weapons that will help them to truly change the course of a battle. They will wield executioner relic blades, two-handed swords of incredible worth, surrounded by power fields that assist in rending ceramite as if it were paper mache. They carry the Absolvor heavy bolt pistol and have a Rosarius, an icon of their rank that emits a power field that protects them from many harms. But it is through their last item that their strangest effect is gained. The Tempo Mortis. It is a large hourglass-shaped icon that they carry until its power is released, and it affects the flow of time in a very compact and specific region. Mostly, it is used against an enemy unit so that the odds are equalled, and any who are with the Judiciar have a greater chance of slaying their foes before they can react. Now there is little information on the tempora mortis, so I cannot extrapolate further. My apologies. Hopefully, maybe, they will give us further information in the future. Like the lieutenant, this is a rank that has come in with the primaris, but one I like and think adds a certain something to the chapter organization, and definitely to the aesthetic of the Space Marines army as a whole. Let's be honest, I think they are cool, and I hope to paint up mine as soon as possible. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed this video, then do consider hitting the subscribe button and then the notification bell, as I would not want you to miss out. And you can also support the ongoing work by joining the Patreon, if you are in a benevolent mood. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.